Hey guys, thanks for joining me on a snow day. Sorry I wasn't at school today, but we're going to we'll start and finish this progressivism lecture. So, it'll come up. Looking at review questions I would have asked you in class, but I'll ask the questions and then answer them myself. What problems existed during the Gilded Age? We saw the rich taking most of the power, most of the wealth in the nation through bad business practices like horizontal integration, the building of trusts and monopolies, and cornering the market so they can set what price they want. So that's economically. Politically, we've got the poor being exploited through the use of political machines and a lot of political corruption. So trusts and these large corporations are bribing senators to push through policies that aren't antitrust. We've got the poor being bribed into voting in many cities, such as in New York City and Tammany Hall, and the Tweed Ring that we talked about in class. And socially, we've got the degradation of the poor, living in very cramped quarters, not being paid well. So, next question, how did they try and fix those issues? Well, we've got some antitrust laws like the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890, but just didn't have much teeth, much enforcement behind it. So the government tried to do some things. Socially, many people, such as Jane Addams and Hull House and settlement houses, the idea of social gospel, tried to reach out to the poor and help them in that way. And then workers started to fight for their own rights, and we saw a large labor union rising during this time period, during the Gilded Age. So I'm calling this lecture in this part of our Unit 7, Part 1 unit, progressivism, and it's exactly what it sounds like, progress, like moving forward. Let's progress onto a better society, onto a society where the poor aren't exploited and politics aren't corrupt. So progressivism is kind of like the fighting back against those issues of the Gilded Age. So progressivism is not new, but it really takes hold during this time period. The mugwumps, remember, the Republican Party had split into three factions: the stalwarts that kept a lot of those corrupt government policies, the half-breeds, which were kind of in the middle, and then the mugwumps were the major reform party of the day. They were men of social status. They were concerned about the changes in America's politics. They wanted to enact civil service reform, meaning people who get government jobs should have the merit to have those government jobs. But we are seeing during this time period, because people are making more money because they're working, we're seeing a rise of the middle class, and those middle class people see the degradation of the poor. They also want to fight for their own rights, and they're not able to bump above middle class because those rich people at the top are holding all the wealth. So lots of them will join the Mugwump Party as well. Progressives themselves, this is kind of a definition of progressivism. The progressives believe that government should assist with the welfare of its citizens. That government, yes, is for our protection politically, but also for our protection economically and socially. Here is an umbrella idea of what progressives think government should do to protect public interest and restore order to society. So politically, political machines should no longer exist. The government should stop the corruption, the bribery, the spoil system and patronage that's going on in federal, local, and state politics during this time period. And in order to do that, they need to change voting reform. Remember, during this time period, voting was kind of funky, where you walk across the room with a colored card and everyone can see who you're voting for. That will change, because that's the way that lots of people got intimidated into voting for someone that somebody else wanted them to vote for. And we're going to see, just like we talked about last unit, women being more involved in the workplace, meaning that they will be more involved in the political lives as well. And we're going to see the beginning of the female suffrage movement that will culminate in the 1920, 19th Amendment. Socially, progressives want to stop the degradation of the poor. They want to improve working conditions for laborers. Remember, during this time period, industrialization and factories are coming to a peak, but there's not much care for the individual worker, because workmanship used to be skilled, like artisans would make things, and well, now things are made on a pseudo assembly line. Anybody can crank that wheel, press that button, hammer in that nail, screw that bolt sort of idea. Employers saw employees as, we can get rid of you. And so working conditions just weren't taken care of by employers. They didn't care about their employees. So they were dangerous and dark and cramped, with chemicals and poor ventilation and possibility of getting hurt in a machine. We also see during this time period like really nasty conditions of food factories. Don't think like food factories of today, but like think the meat packing industry or the cheese making industry of this time period. They're just disgusting. People are consuming those things. We're going to get to that when we talk about Upton Sinclair. Women's conditions as well. Of course, we have labor unions that fight for men's rights, but not many labor unions that fight for the rights of women that are working. And more women are leaving the home. Poorer women are leaving the home and working in the workplace in order to make money for their families. Sorry, my husband is playing Fortnite as we speak over there, that way. We're also going to see people fight for the end of child labor, and that goes hand in hand with people fighting for compulsory school, sending children to school and making it illegal for them not to be in school, which of course cuts down on child labor. Conservation is the idea of protecting the environment, and that's going to be a Teddy Roosevelt progressivism idea, because more industrialism just means more pollution. And prohibition, which is the getting rid of alcohol, which will eventually happen in the 1920s. Economic things that progressives want to push forward is regulating trusts. So deciding what trusts actually build the economy. They're the ones that don't control all of the resources, but still provide jobs and help bolster the economy. And what trusts are bad trusts. So there's good trusts and bad trusts. Bad trusts are the ones that completely corner the market, completely set the price, and make it impossible for small businesses or other markets to rise because they have a monopoly. Consumer protection, same thing as like the whole what are we eating, what's in our food, meat packing industry debacle that we'll get into. Banking reform, should banks charge these outrageous interest rates? Should banks be so willing to give out loans all the time? Remember, part of the reason that we have a panic of 1873 and 1893 and all these panics because banks were over speculating. They're giving out a bunch of loans, trying to make it big, essentially. But they oftentimes people default on their loans during this time period and don't pay them back, meaning the bank is going to fail. So let's set up a reform that stops that. And then labor union reform. The issue of who should strike, when are they allowed to strike, how are employers allowed to treat employees, how should the government respond to major labor union issues. So these are progressive ideas that will be pushed during the time period. The progressive agenda, what progressives will push when they form their own political party, will stem from those issues that we just talked about. So let's zoom in on what some of those mean. Trust we talked about in our last unit. By 1910, wealthy is 2%. So 2% of people own 20% of wealth in the nation. And those 2% are those large corporation trust owners. And when I say oligarchy means that a handful of people kind of own the power. We also, sometimes historians call this a plutocracy, and that's when large numbers of politicians are dominated by trusts in state, local, and federal government, meaning that their votes are influenced by a company that's putting money in their pocket or putting money into their campaign. And the issue of this is it's corrupting the economy because small businesses just can't compete with someone who has cornered the market and who can create a surplus of goods and sell them for less but still make money. And set the price at whatever they want, like Rockefeller and Standard Oil owned 50% of the oil in the nation. They can set the price on oil in a sense. But they're not only just corrupting economics, they're corrupting the government. So that is one issue that progressives really want to target. One of the reasons they're able to get so much power is through political machines. And political machines can be large, federal level, state level, or local level, but the real issue during this time period is the local level. For example, Boss Tweed and Tammany Hall, like we have talked about, the boss controls politics and essentially decides who gets elected into what positions because they target immigrants and hand out jobs and places to stay and money in order to get their votes. They bribe for votes, and their money comes from taxes, comes from the pockets of tax-paying Americans. Federal income tax, not a thing yet, Jordan, but state and local income taxes are currently prevalent. Please be quiet, okay? So immigrants were enticed by these bosses and then vote for who these bosses say to vote for. So yes, immigrants' voices are being heard, but they're not as informed as the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, the WASPs, the white people in the city. Jordan. So these local politics are now out of the hands of the white voters, of which they have a problem with. But not only they have a problem with it, but immigrants aren't, many of them aren't well informed of what's going on, so they're not really being represented in the way that they should be. Urbanization and urban sprawl, we hear that term nowadays, but it really is prevalent in this era. This is the beginning of the modern era. So we saw through Ellis Island from 1880 to 1920 about 27 million immigrants come through, mostly through Ellis Island and Angel Island. Yes, lots of them return back, that birds of passage idea that we talked about, but the majority of them will come and stay in cities because cities have the things that they need: jobs, factories, shopping, entertainment. Cities also have new technology in a sense, like plumbing and electricity, street lights. But cities also kind of offer the idea of being anonymous. Yes, you're in a new country, but you can settle in your enclave of people with your culture. Whereas if you moved out into rural America, assimilation was key. So many immigrants stay in the cities because it's there and it's easy. Many rural Americans move to the cities because of the new technology and the job opportunities. And, oh, I'm not doing well out here, let me try and hit it big in the city, in a sense. So because so many people are living in these city centers like Chicago, like Milwaukee, like New York City, like Pittsburgh, Boston, we get these results of urbanization. Tenements are crowded, and I've put a picture here. So you see that this is like a street, and there's a tenement, like if there's a block, there's a tenement here and a tenement here. So if you're living in the back of the tenement, it's a lot worse than living in the front because your windows are literally facing another tenement, and there's not going to be much light or ventilation. Most tenements don't have electricity as fast as the suburbs will have electricity because the landlords just don't want to pay for that. Many families be crowded into small rooms. Maybe not even a bathroom for that family. Maybe there's one bathroom in the whole tenement or one bathroom on the whole hall, or maybe there's no bathroom at all and it's a pot in the corner or an outhouse. The infrastructure of the cities just could not withstand overpopulation. We were building up because of skyscrapers, but that doesn't mean that it was good structurally. That doesn't mean that it was good conditions for those living there. Crime is also going to run rampant when you have lots of people all together. Violence, drinking, gambling, drugs, theft, those sort of things will be extremely common in these parts of the cities, in the poorer parts of the cities. And working conditions aren't going to be that great either. Women and children will be exploited because employers could pay them less. There was no discriminatory laws. First of all, children shouldn't be working, but they could pay children less, and they could pay women less, and they could pay immigrants less than they could pay a white adult male. And so they did that, and that's why they ended up being exploited. Their working conditions were appalling in a sense of getting things caught in machines and poor ventilation, dangerous conditions, like poor lighting, those sort of things, disgusting, breathing in chemicals. And so these labor laws that the Knights of Labor and the American Federation Labor are pushing, yes, we're getting the wheels rolling here, but not fast enough. Not when 30,000 are killed in industrial accidents in New York City in the first half of this next century, the 20th century.